Okay, so this week on this video dealing with Mesoamerica, Middle America, Central America, I'm going to talk a little bit about the legacy of colonialism. That'll kind of be a theme throughout some of the rest of these weeks as we look at colonialism, of course, in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, Far East Asia to a lesser degree, but sort of a European impact and how that affects the economics and some of the general governing aspects today. So in the PowerPoint pack, and I'm still trying to figure out, I know how to do it to get the video on the PowerPoint, but it's not working out anyway. So down the road, I hope to put the video in the PowerPoint and have that all worked out. I should have worked that out before the semester starts, but anyway, so and I'm going to try to keep these videos short because I know from my own experience, no one's going to watch a video longer than probably 10 minutes, if that even. So anyway, so we're going to deal a little bit, or I'm going to talk about the sort of colonial legacy in Latin America and to some degree, obviously, in South America, which is what the next chapter will deal with. As you might imagine, of course, it has a huge impact. So on slide number 11 in the PowerPoint pack that I sort of made, it talks, starting after the Spanish conquistadors come and defeat the Aztecs, and then, of course, start to then assimilate or, there's still a huge Aztec influence in modern Mexico, of course. You see the word mulatto, mestizos et al. In the United States, those terms, of course, are not terms we usually bandy about much anymore. They're politically incorrect, of course, in many ways. But in many Central American, South American countries, those are still categories that people might check boxes on. So mulatto is a heritage of mixed African and European descent. And the mestizo refers to a mixture of native or First Nations or Indian or however you want to phrase it, and European descent. So the difference between sort of Spanish colonialism and Portuguese versus the British, let's say, coming into the United States or what will become the United States and Canada is, as we know from stories that we've talked about all of your life, probably in public education and private education, is pilgrims coming over, they bring families and they come as a unit. There are, of course, unattached men mostly coming over, and that's really what the Spanish version is. You bring in a bunch of basically unattached men, and they're basically looking to make a literal new world, a new race of people that come in. So you have those kinds of things that will, of course, lead to tensions down the road in terms of today's economic inequities, racial and ethnic divides that plague Central and South America in many ways, even more so than even here in the United States. And often the term hacienda is sort of a way that land was divided up. So you see the word, we use the word plantation. We'll see plantation agriculture usually in slave areas. So the United States, southern United States, if any of you ever travel through, New Orleans or Louisiana, rather, Mississippi, etc., we have in our mind these plantations, these big houses, and slaves, of course, usually using cotton or planting or picking cotton and tobacco and rice in the Deep South. Plantation agriculture, using usually slave labor who live on the land, and of course slavery is, even with it's a bad economic model as opposed to being, in addition to being immoral rather, and of course no pay and all that. In terms of a hacienda culture, you still have large groups or large tracts of land. Hacienda is more like feudalism, where you have these, what they might call campesinos or peasants. They're working the land. They get to keep a little for themselves, so they're working for basically what's called subsistence agriculture. And then, of course, the lord of the land, the don, the head of the hacienda, he's taking most of the produce and most of the profit. And then, so that's land alienation. Then refers to taking the land or alienating or separating away the land from the native populations, right? So you as we all know, they come in. They defeat the Aztecs. They use many other tribes to help defeat the Aztecs. It's not like the Aztecs were beloved by their neighbors. And then, of course, they come in and start to move in and take the land and then alienate and separate. As you might imagine, that, of course, sets down a course for current economic issues, poverty issues, and things like that, especially as sort of First Nation native tribes have lost their land from hundreds of years ago. And, of course, the way it's been set up, it makes it hard to sort of get back in to that. That's one of the challenges of more modern governments in the region, is how do we sort of equalize land distribution. Some try redistribution, like the Marxist model. Some try a more democratic approach. Anyway, that's what land alienation means in that sense. On the next slide, you see a picture of Simón Bolívar. Now, Bolívar is more of a hero. He's kind of like the George Washington of South America, for lack of a better analogy. But the Bolivarian revolutions really inspire Central and South American countries. So you'll see, if you go probably from Mexico all the way down to Chile, you'll see independence dates set around anywhere from like 1810 to 1821, thereabouts. I mean, that's just a general picture. Why? Well, because there's this sort of wind of revolution and liberty. And then Spain is also, by this time, really sort of a creaky old empire that's not really able to afford and or defend its empire. Portugal to some degree as well, though they hang on, as we'll see, especially when we get to Africa. Portugal will hang on till the bitter end. And then the Monroe Doctrine, you'll see that referenced in your assignment, your essay assignment this week. That's from President James Monroe, who basically, it's more of a policy statement than an actual policy. It's just this American idea, I guess you could say, that we, the United States, will be the guarantor, protector. We don't want, at that point, we don't want European powers, so the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, in our hemisphere, causing trouble on our southern flank, if you will. Obviously, at this time, there's still British presence in the Bahamas and Jamaica, and French presence in the Caribbean as well, and that. But as a sort of general principle, in the 1820s, we're not really powerful enough to do anything about it. This will have a huge impact on the way we deal with the Panama Canal, Honduras and Nicaragua in the early 20th century, Haiti. And then now, of course, as you'll read in your essay or the sources I gave you, we're not worried about European powers now. We're worried about China in Latin America and the sort of strategic problems that might pose. But that's a legacy of sort of American involvement, in some cases, of course, over-involvement, and maybe in some cases under-involvement. As you might imagine, that can create some hard feelings, as he said, an understatement. Now, the legacy, this is slide 13, is really, so the appropriation of land. So appropriation, again, is the taking of land. And then in the real, well, there's many negatives and more immoral and crimes and, unethical as things attached to that. But really, a lot of it was, why did they take the land? Well, they take the land to then exploit the land for their own interest, right? So it's not like they came in, okay, we're going to partner with you, we're going to share with you, we're going to do all the kinds of things, we might sort of look at today. Okay, I get share, I get stock in the company, I get pay raises, I get the bonus, I'm working hard, I get all this kind of stuff. They cash crop it, which means they basically just tap that land for whatever it is they're growing, whether it's maize or plantains or cotton or whatever. And I don't know how many of y'all know anything about farming, but kind of farming 101 is you have to rotate your crops. You let part of the land lie fallow for a year or two, meaning you don't use it so it can rest, right? You might grow cotton a couple of years and then stop and then grow something else, grow alfalfa or sorghum or whatever, so the land nutrients don't get sapped. The Spanish knew that. That's not a modern concept. They know that. They don't care, right? So they come in and they just tap the land hard, get rich quick, and then not really caring or thinking about the locals or even the future for that matter. It's kind of the same with the gold and all that, right? They're just taking. They send most of it back to Spain. Some of it, of course, at the bottom of the ocean, and there's no real care or thought about the local populations. That, of course, pays negative dividends, negative legacy going forward, because you're taking both human resources, obviously, and things like the diseases they bring and the abuse of the locals. And then, of course, also the natural resources, the gold, later on the oil, the natural gas, lead, copper, etc. Though it's, now that those countries are in charge of their own land, it's a little more equitable than it used to be. Arable land, so that's what I mean. Their arable land is farming land and then converted to cash cropping. So instead of farming it for local consumption, and then you have surplus that you then sell to market or trade internationally or take back to Spain, you just basically tap it for all you can get and take it back without really any sort of thought for the future or the locals. Land alienation, some of the real impacts of that, of course, again, it's not just that it's bad for the individuals at the time. It can lead to famine, meaning widespread hunger and calorie, deficits, which is fancy talk for starving to death. They're not intentionally induced necessarily, but they are induced by poor land policy, poor choices, immoral and racist decision making, and those kinds of things, which of course can lead to persistent poverty. So there is in many of these places there is a persistent poverty, and it's easy sometimes to blame the locals. And I mean, there's not always necessarily always a 100% villain, but that starts it off on a bad road because it concentrates the land in the hands of a very few people, and there's not a lot of land, at least especially in the Western conception in the United States, right? Property, life, liberty, and property. Property is like one of the main ways towards wealth and independence and to maintain your liberty. And in areas where there's not a lot of freedom of land, or the land is concentrated in the hands of a very few, you see problems, of course, with freedom and liberty and independence and all of that. Migration, of course, refers to moving within a country. So obviously in the news, we talk about immigration. So immigration is coming into a country. Emigration with an E is leaving a country to go into another country. And then migration is moving within a country. So if you have people moving from, say, Baja, Mexico to Chihuahua or down south, that can put stress on resources. It can, again, force people to move out of their ancestral homelands in search of work, in search of food, and it can really exacerbate a problem in terms of, sometimes it's, it can be a positive or it can be a boon. So, for example, in many ways, what's called the Great Migration in the United States, where you have a large percentage of African Americans in the South fleeing Jim Crow and looking for new opportunities. They go to here out in Los Angeles, where I am in California. They go up into Detroit, Philadelphia. So migration there is moving within the United States. So it's not always a negative thing, of course. I mean, they might be going away from something negative, but they might be going to something looking for a positive. But again, it creates population shifts kind of artificially, because if things were handled well by the Spanish, and you could even say if they just stayed home, but once they're here, they could have done a lot better, to say the least. And then there's also in many of these countries little agricultural diversity, which is fancy talk for putting all your eggs in one basket. So your pro tip for the day, your life tip for the day, your parents may have told you this already, is diversify your portfolio, right? Like, don't put all of your money in one thing, because if that one thing goes belly up, then you're out of money. So what you'll see oftentimes in some of these Central American countries especially is they'll make a ton of money on coffee or a ton of money on plantains or on tourism. And then they have an earthquake or a famine or a drought or a bug, a fruit fly or something that'll devastate a crop. And now they're done. Not done forever, but done for a while. And it's hard to get back into, you get up again, you try to get up again, and then you get knocked down, right? And then you just keep getting knocked down. And sometimes those forces are external, but sometimes they're internal, right? So the successful countries, more successful, Mexico has a super diverse economy. I mean, tourism, gold, oil, natural gas, human resources, Obviously, we talk somewhat about, they do have challenges, of course, drug cartels and all that, but it's actually a pretty strong economy given the challenges that they have. Costa Rica, super strong economy, high tech, service industry, tourism. They make coffee, they make other sort of exports that are, so if they get hit with a hurricane, the same hurricane that might hit Nicaragua, Costa Rica is going to survive that and not be knocked off its axis big time, where Nicaragua, which is more sort of, one-stop shopping, might have a difficult time to overcome all of that. And then obviously, again, just the cultural diversity of the region I would obviously put that on the positive. If you see in the packet later on, you'll see pictures from Diego Rivera, the Mexican muralist. There's a movement of art. If you go into North and Central and South America, you'll see basically a New World version of Baroque architecture. If you listen to the music, so here in California, we have a lot of mariachi music, right, which is the people with the guitars and the trumpets and the singing. And it's vaguely got an oompa sound like German music, right? And of course, there's a lot of similarities between cultures because, humans are essentially the same, even though there's cultural differences. There is a European influence mixed in with the tribal influence. Then, of course, over time, it becomes a local influence. So you see this huge diversity of culture, of religion and music and art and philosophy and literature and all those kinds of things. And it's a mixture of indigenous and European art forms and other things that sort of give a rich tapestry. So that is on the positive side of the ledger, I guess, another legacy of the colonial period. If you hear me down the road, I'll talk about colonialism 1.0 versus colonialism 2.0. 1.0 is this sort of what we, at least here in the Southwest United States, these sort of Spanish New World, 1600s colonialism. And then 2.0 is the 19th century European version. So anyway, so that's all I have for this, and I will talk to y'all next week.